time to get your fix. I am Nikki Lee.
And I am Buck Joffrey, the health-conscious hedonist.
Today, we are going to dive into the special interview on the microbiome and diet with New York Times bestselling author Dr. Stephen Gundry. This is The Breakdown. We are talking to Dr. Stephen Gundry, MD. He's a renowned cardiologist, a New York Times bestselling author, and a medical researcher. His mission is to improve your health, happiness, and longevity by making simple changes to your diet. Dr. Stephen Gundry, it is so good to see you. I have not seen you in years.
It's true, and great to see you as well.
We were commenting that I see him around town because, he lives in Montecito. And there was a restaurant called B of I here that, like, every time I'd go, Stephen was there. And I would look at him because, he didn't know me, so I didn't go introduce myself. But one of the things I always found remarkable is how much olive oil that he ate.
That's very true.
I love that. I, too, am very good at eating olive oil.
It is a requirement to bring the large bottle of olive oil from Sicily to the table. And you're right. I consume a great deal of it, as does my wife.
Well, we certainly can get to why that might be. But
oh, my God.
And I, believe it or not, I still see patients 6 days a week. As soon as we finish today, I'll see my patients. I see them on Saturdays and Sundays.
Wow.
Yeah.
Working on the weekends.
Working on the weekends.
Wow. And in that time.
And literally I do it. People ask me, well, you don't have to do this anymore. I do it because almost every day I get to see what I would have considered a miracle 25 years ago. And now if I don't see a miracle once a day, I'm pretty disappointed. But so I keep showing up to see a miracle.
Well, you started out as at the University of Michigan, and you trained as a cardiothoracic surgeon, which I don't think people really know that. I mean, that was even shocking when I found that out. Tell us about your journey from that to now writing about prevention-related topics, mostly about digestion and the gut.
So, I trained in general surgery and then cardiothoracic surgery at Michigan. I did my children's heart surgery training at Great Ormond Street in London, and then eventually wound up as professor and chairman of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda University here in Southern California. My partner and friend, the now late Leonard Bailey, and I started pediatric and infant heart transplantation, and I became famous for robotic heart surgery and minimally invasive heart surgery, and became famous for inventing ways to protect the heart during heart surgery. And how I ended up doing this is almost 30 years ago now. I was sent a patient who I refer to as Big Ed in all my books. Big Ed was a 48-year-old gentleman from Miami, Florida, who had inoperable coronary artery disease. What that means is he had so much junk in his coronary arteries that you couldn't put stents in them. There were too many places. You couldn't do bypasses because there wasn't a place to jump past the blockage to land. And he had gone around the country looking for idiot surgeons such as myself to operate on him. And there's always a handful of idiots like myself who would take on really tough cases. So he spent about 6 months going around to these centers, and I could name them, but I won't. And everywhere he went, he was turned down. And after 6 months, he arrives in my office bearing his angiogram, the movie of his blood vessels from Miami 6 months ago. And I look at it and I go, I'm sorry, I don't like to turn people down, but I agree with everybody. I can't help you. He says, yeah, that's what they all say. But let me tell you, this 6 months I've been on a diet and I've lost 45 pounds. Now, this is the guy who's 265 when I meet him, Big Ed. And he says, I went to a health food store and I've been taking all these supplements. And he actually brought in a giant shopping bag of supplements.
Oh, wow.
And he says, maybe I did something in here. And, I'm scratching my professor beard going, well, good for you, losing weight. But That's not going to do anything in there. And I know what you did with all those supplements. You made expensive urine, which I firmly believed back then. And he says, well, look, I've come all this way. What would it hurt to get another angiogram? And I go, okay, don't get your hopes up. So the next day, we get a new cardiac catheterization. And this guy has cleaned out 50% of the blockages in his heart.
Wow.
Gone. Yeah. Wow. Now that's impossible. No, it is, at least that's what I thought. And there I am looking at it. Now, if I know what I knew today, I go, hey, that's great. Keep doing by. Good for you. But I didn't know that. So I actually did a 5-vessel coronary bypass on because now I had places to put.
Oh.
But afterwards, the researcher in me said, I've never seen anything like that. But tell me what your diet looks like. And let me look at those supplements. And I'm looking through his stuff, and half the stuff in his bag is the stuff I'm putting down the veins and arteries of the heart to keep it from dying. And it never occurred to me to swallow the dumb things. So why that's so poignant is, even though famous heart surgeon, I was 70 pounds overweight despite running 30 miles a week, going to the gym 1 hour a day, eating a healthy low-fat diet. And I had arthritis. I had to wear braces on my knees. I had high blood pressure. I had pre-diabetes. I had migraine headaches doing baby heart transplants. I don't recommend it. And high cholesterol. I started taking a bunch of the supplements that I used to put down veins and arteries. And I lost 50 pounds my first year. I mean, it just fell off. And all my issues went away. Migraines went away. High blood pressure went away. Arthritis went away. So I started, and my blood work totally changed. And I lost another 20 pounds subsequently. I've kept it all for almost 30 years now. So the first thing I did was I would operate on patients, and then I'd go, here's a list of foods I don't want you to eat. Here's a list of foods you can't eat. Here's a list. Go to Costco, go to Trader Joe's, go to the health food store and buy these supplements because I don't want to operate on you again. And as these people did this, the same things that were happening to me happened to them. They'd call up and say, well, my blood pressure is really low. What's going on? And I said, well, let's throw some of your blood pressure meds away. And they call up and said, what the heck? My blood sugar, it's so low. I said, well, So after a year of doing this at Loma Linda, I had an epiphany. I said, I got this all wrong. I shouldn't operate on people and then teach them to stay away from me the rest of their lives. I should teach them how to eat, and I'll never have to operate on them. And what a dumb thing to do as a heart surgeon. I mean, dumb. So at the height of my career, I resigned my position and head out to Palm Springs, which is right around the corner from Loma Linda, and set up an office and say, hey, I'm a researcher and I want you to eat certain things and I don't want you to eat other things, and go buy these supplements at a health food store, and I want to track your blood work every 3 months. And okay. And, insurance will cover it. And that's actually how it all started. So I started publishing my results, at the American Heart Association. And I started, seeing these, what would appear to be miracles. And then I started writing books about it.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more interview with Stephen Gundry. Welcome back, Longevity Junkie. Back to our interview with Dr. Stephen Gundry.
Sort of approaching this from, our training. Like, it seems like, none of this stuff was ever taught to us in medical school, right? And I don't even know if there's anything taught about microbiome right now. In fact, I went to...
No.
Yeah. So in fact, I went to a GI guide, not too long ago because I felt like I was having some, distension, whatever. And one of the questions I really had for him was, well, what about the microbiome, right? And I'm honestly, I'm not just, I was being completely open-minded about this because I just don't know anything about that stuff. I never learned anything about it. And he told me, frankly, that there just wasn't enough research to really suggest there was any involvement here. So let me ask you this. First of all, so I went back and started kind of looking through the literature, and I was like, yeah, the issue is that they're really, the way we evaluate studies, and as you did as a cardiothoracic surgeon, as an academic, we don't have those kinds of studies for microbiome. So how do you, is obviously a smart guy with tremendous training and, thinking ability. How do you put these things together without those sort of, bigger traditional medical studies and come out with some of the ideas that you have right now?
Those studies do exist, but we unfortunately are so in our own silos that we don't mix with those people. For instance, I just got back a few weeks ago from the annual meeting of the Society of Microbiota. Now, what the heart surgeon doing at that? But I present papers there, and I learn a whole lot. And one of the things that is fascinating is there is a deep research into the microbiome and its effect on all aspects of health. You choose the disease process. There are beautiful papers describing how the dysbiotic microbiome affects it and a leaky gut affects it. In fact, speaking of gastroenterologists, the guy who I think changed everything is an Italian pediatric gastroenterologist who was at the University of Maryland, where I started my career, who's now at Harvard, by the name of Alessio Fasano. And Alessio Fasano wanted to find out why celiac disease happened and why gluten was such a troublemaker with celiac. And he stumbled almost on how cholera causes death by watery diarrhea. And I won't give you the pitch I tell my patients when I teach them this, but he eventually found that gluten, which happens to be a lectin, which is how I got into this, it's a protein that wants to attach to a particular sugar molecule on the wall of our gut. And if it can attach, then it makes a compound that's called zonulin. And zonulin then attaches to another receptor. And lo and behold, it breaks the tight junctions that hold these little cells together. And there's a gap. And then gluten or other lectins go through the wall, and your immune system, 80% of all your white blood cells sit on the other side of the gut. And as a general surgeon, it should have been obvious to me because, there were all these lymph nodes in the gut. And you remember from residency, and there's Peyer's patches. They're all there. Well, what are they doing there? Well, because mischief is coming through a single cell wall, and they're there. And it's okay if that happens every now and then, but if you have chronic leaky gut, intestinal permeability, and then the immune system turns on, sends out information around the body that you're under attack. So inflammation is actually, chronic inflammation is driven by this leaky gut. So back to Alessio Fasano. A few years ago, he and I were both on a panel in Paris talking about this, and he's a really funny guy. He's really smart. And I had a talk that all disease begins in Hippocrates is right, but all disease begins in a leaky gut. And I actually praised his work. Next thing I know, there's a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, all disease begins in a leaky gut, from Alessio Fasano. He's right. So this is not pseudoscience. We can measure these things. We can measure it with blood tests. We can watch it go away. In my area of interest, which is autoimmune disease, I have published papers that 94% of people with an autoimmune disease following my program 1 year later are in remission on no medications. 94%, it's not bad.
Is a leaky gut, when you were talking about there's that space in between where the lectin can go in when you have gluten and things like that, is that that space and pathway out? Is that the leaky gut? Okay, so what is a way to actually balance and close those pathways so that things don't leak out?
I'm glad you asked. That's been the subject of all my books. You can heal a leaky gut. When I started doing this 25 years ago, I was pretty naive, and I thought you could do this in a couple of weeks by eliminating foods that want to cause leaky gut and taking certain supplements that can heal leaky gut, and I make them at Gundry MD. But as we've been able to measure blood tests for leaky gut, it takes on average 9 months to a year to seal somebody's leaky gut.
Microbiome, one hand, lectins, another, and in the middle we have leaky gut. And I haven't connected those three, and that's, I think, for our audience, that's really important.
So I talked about this in the big book, The Plant Paradox. We would normally, there's always a constant battle between plants and their predators. Plants were here first. They had it great because nobody wanted to eat them. When animals appeared and their first predator were insects, they had a problem because they couldn't run, they couldn't hide, they couldn't fight. But they're chemists of incredible ability. So they use biologic warfare to make their predators think twice. And that biologic warfare is, among other things, causing leaky gut. We developed a beautiful defense system against plant compounds, and that is our microbiome. Believe it or not, normally there are bacteria that love to eat gluten. Most of us don't have those guys anymore. There are bacteria that love to eat oxalates, and people hear about, oxalates, terrible. Normally, you should have oxalate-eating bacteria. The vast majority of people with oxalate stones, for instance, or pain, we can measure. They don't have those bacteria. We can reintroduce them now, luckily. But you start going, son of a gun. Our whole defense system is gone. Why? You and I know. Broad-spectrum antibiotics were introduced when I was in medical school in the 1970s, and they were miraculous. I mean, you just shotgun everything, and we don't even have to work at it, right? But we had no idea that they were killing off these guys in our gut because we didn't even know those guys were there when we were in medical school. And you're right. Mark Hyman, who's a friend of mine, has a daughter who's a third year medical student in a very prestigious institution. I will not mention the name. They have not had a course on the microbiome.
Or a lecture, even, probably.
Or a lecture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so just again for my own edification, because I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So the thought is that initially there are these plants that essentially have defense mechanisms of their own against, predators, insects, whatever. And those, when we ingest them, they can potentially cause these sort of chemical reactions that lead to leaky gut syndrome. But the microbiome that we've evolved to have typically would prevent those chemicals from creating that problem. Is that right?
They would they would intercept these before they ever got to us.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. That's really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, you've got your, offensive front line protecting the quarterback. And unfortunately, our offensive front line is now third stringers, and even the water boy is being thrown in there. And, poor Aaron Rodgers is getting sacked every 2 seconds.
Yeah, he's just slow now. That's all.
So our defense is gone. And I call them the 7 deadly disruptors. And one of the biggest ones, which just continues to drive me crazy, is our use of Roundup, glyphosate. Glyphosate most people don't know, Roundup was patented as an antibiotic, wasn't patented as a weed killer. And we had no idea that the shikimate pathway, which is how glyphosate kills plants, is used by bacteria. And so glyphosate is everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. There is no oat product in the United States, even organic oat products, that doesn't have glyphosate. All of our wheat has glyphosate. All of our corn has glyphosate. And glyphosate is one of the best ways to kill off our microbiome. And it's in all of our food.
There is, I'm sure, I just am not up on this kind of stuff, but a way to actually examine what your microbiome currently is and the way it should be.
So the microbiome tests are getting better and better. The reason they're getting better and better is we can identify these bugs with their RNA or DNA signature. And with each passing year, we're beginning to realize that there are phyla, there are species, and there are, individual differences between species of bacteria. And again, with each passing year, we're beginning to realize, well, this particular bug needs a product that another bug makes, like an assembly line. And if you don't have this one product, you can't. The other guy has nothing to eat, even though it seems like you ought to have something to eat. So it gets really, the complexity of this ecosystem is mind-boggling. Mm-hmm. And these bacteria are, again, it sounds California speak, these are sentient beings. They think, they see. They don't see and think like we do, but they know who's around them. There is such a thing as quorum sensing. They know when they're going to have a rave party. The complexity that has developed through 2 billion years by bacteria, kind of getting what they want, is just mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well, there's a step in between, right? I don't disagree with kind of what you're saying, but the step in between is the low-grade inflammation that is causing in the body, right? And so even a lot of forward-thinking cardiologists right now, and I don't know what your thoughts necessarily on elevated lipids like ApoB and those types of things are. However, they do definitely talk about inflammation levels, right? You can't have that. You basically need the components of the atherogenic particles, and then you need to have inflammation, and the combination of the two is ultimately that's resulting in coronary artery disease. So when you're talking about the gut, I think what you're getting at here, if I'm understanding correctly, is this issue of inflammation, which is at the core of virtually every disease process that we know. Is that fair?
Yeah. And where is the inflammation coming from?
The gut, right.
It's coming from the gut. And it's like we're here in California fighting inflammation with anti-inflammatory foods is like fighting a forest fire with a garden hose. And we know how well that works out. So you have to fix the actual root problem that Hippocrates identified. And that is, you make that wall intact and it all goes away. Since you mentioned cholesterol, Michael DeBakey, really one of the fathers of heart surgery, said cholesterol has nothing to do with heart disease. It's an innocent bystander. And I firmly agree with him. I have people with total cholesterols of over 500, with LDLs of 400, with ApoBs of 300. And they have CT coronary angiograms with absolutely no plaque. And they're in their late 60s and 70s. Why? Because they have no leaky gut. They have no inflammation.
Well, wouldn't it be more reasonable in that situation to say that, elevated cholesterol is, perhaps necessary but insufficient to to create coronary artery disease. Because I think if you look at this Mendelian randomization studies, there is a link, between ApoB levels, even controlled for inflammation, for some level of increased coronary artery disease. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, the way I've thought about it is not terribly different from what you're saying, except to say that cholesterol alone does not cause coronary artery disease. And, but to eliminate it completely from the conversation, I wonder, given what we know in the, for people with familial hypercholesteremia, high levels, populations with high levels, or any of these population studies that are pretty powerful.
Well, but remember, when statins came out, and I remember when they came out, we all thought that the way they worked was by lowering LDL or ApoB. Lo and behold, it turns out that statins have their effect by blocking toll-like receptors, which turns on the immune system. And I've written a lot about this. And the more statin drug you use, the lower the LDL goes, but the more you block toll-like receptors. So it's like, lowering ApoB looks like that's the effect, but it's not. The effect was blocking inflammation, was blocking toll-like receptors. So the lowering of LDL was a side effect of what statins were really doing, and that was blocking the inflammatory pathway on the vessel wall. So I'll prescribe statins on a guy who's just had a heart attack.
Well, I'm not even necessarily talking about statins as much as the role of cholesterol, period. I mean, you could go around and say, we don't need statins. We could use some of these newer drugs, that are like PCSK9 inhibitors, things like that. Yeah. But and I'm asking you just this because this is a common conversation in this longevity space right now. And you're a former, a heart surgeon. And so to me, I just look at this and I'm like, well, gosh, if I have somebody has really low inflammation, but really high cholesterol, should we really ignore that cholesterol? If they have soft plaques in their coronary arteries?
So if you've got soft plaque in your coronary artery, I guarantee you have inflammation in your artery. And there are now some very sophisticated tests to look at arterial inflammation. I've written several papers about them. And the fascinating thing is you can alter that inflammation in a vessel wall with actually supplements. You can alter what I describe as the stickiness of a blood vessel wall.
You told me that you literally test every day to see the strength of your microbiome.
Not me, but I test people. Yeah,
that's what I swear I heard him say. And that's what I was wondering. I was like, where are these?
No, we can order the test, and you'll get a. Now the problem is that's a snapshot.
Okay, no, very true, very true. Because everything that you consume changes it in an instant. So
you can change your microbiome rather dramatically in 3 days, and I've written about that in Plant Paradox.
And that's how you would say to balance it. What are those steps if people wanted to take action right now?
So that's the exciting part. The whole reason I do this is you can change all these things, and it's within really everybody's purvey to do that. So, I mean, just yesterday I saw a person who had 2 autoimmune diseases when we first saw them. They had lupus and they had rheumatoid arthritis, and they had active markers of anti-nuclear antibody and active RF factor and anti-CCP3, and they had leaky gut. Well, their leaky gut is now repairing. It's about 2/3 of the way repaired, but we've watched on 3-month intervals their markers of lupus and rheumatoid arthritis come down, and then just yesterday they no longer are positive for anti-nuclear antibody, and they're no longer positive for rheumatoid factor or CCP3.
So you think about it more as, or maybe it's an and here, but I what I'm getting at is more, feeding the bacteria that are already there with prebiotics and postbiotics, but not necessarily actually doing probiotics necessarily, but actually just
you got it. I'll give you an example from Gut Check, which I even stubbed Dale Bredesen on. So he and I are both very interested in the ApoE4 mutation, the Alzheimer's gene. I got interested in it because it affects heart disease, atherosclerosis. He got interested in it from Alzheimer's. And that's how we became friends. So and we're learning more about why this gene does what it does. But one of the things that shocked me in writing Gut Check is we know that these bacteria that are really good for your brain, that are really good for sealing your gut wall, make a compound called butyrate. And there's a class of bacteria that do this. The ApoE4 gene prevents those bacteria from growing in your gut. It literally says, no, this is not a good place for you guys. And we're going to make some compounds that you guys really can't grow. And then you go, son of a gun, this has nothing to do with its working on cholesterol in the brain, which is one of the theories. This has nothing to do with you guys don't transport long-chain fatty acids into your brain, which is true. This has to do with you don't have the right gut bacteria. So what do you do about that? Well, the good news is a company called Pendulum Life spent 10 years growing a bug called Akkermansia mucinophila, mucus-loving Akkermansia. It took 10 years in the lab to do this, and it's now available, and you can swallow the dumb stuff.
It's funny that you said that our health and every disease begins in the gut, because literally yesterday in my Qigong class, my master was telling me about that as well, about how it all begins right here in the stomach, everything.
One of my patients is a Buddhist scholar and Sanskrit scholar, and he came to me one time a couple of years ago. He says, Hippocrates and the Buddha were contemporaries. And I said, I didn't know that. He says, yeah, they were contemporaries. He says, I was reading some of the Sanskrit of the Buddha's saying, and he says, did you know that the Buddha said that enlightenment comes from the intestines? Mm-hmm. And I'm going, was he talking to Hippocrates? What the heck? How these guys know all this?
Yeah, it's really insane.
I mean, I've written, we know that yoga practitioners, humans, their gut microbiome is far more diverse than if they don't do yoga. Recently, I started working with a vibration plate that was designed by NASA to build bone for the astronauts. And astronauts lose huge amounts of bone in space.
Oh, wow.
And they build a vibration plate so that they would build bone. And they showed that, in fact, it would activate stem cells, bone marrow stem cells, blah, blah, blah. And they wanted me to have an input on this. And I said, well, that's all really cool. But I bet you there's a paper somewhere that says your plate alters the microbiome and makes it more diverse. And I found it, of course. And I said it to him. And I said, I'm happy to talk to you now because guess what? Your dumb plate is changing the microbiome.
So how would that work? I mean, because effectively you're talking about sort of more physical movement at that point, or like
a vibration and a frequency, maybe?
Yeah, frequency.
Yeah. Yep. I literally am looking at my vibe plate right now. I have one.
I mean, I just don't know enough, I guess, about the microbiome here, but I'm trying to understand like how
they want us to walk. We're walking creatures.
Okay. So it's an exercise related thing. Okay.
Yeah, so even like after you eat, like it's recommended that you at least take like a 15-minute walk after you eat, and that actually aids in digestion and absorption of nutrients and things like that.
Yeah, you look at, so many cultures
Mhm.
take a walk after dinner, after eating. And there's some really good human studies looking at people who walk 10 minutes before their meal versus who walk 10 minutes after the meal.
Mm.
And the people who walk 10 minutes after the meal actually lose weight compared to the people who walk 10 minutes before the meal, even though they do exactly the same amount of exercise.
Right, the amount of steps are the same.
Yeah, the steps same.
Longevity is not an old subject, but it's definitely a topic that is, trending, if you will. And it seems like the last 30 years, you have also, come across all these new studies and, your arguments are increasingly changing with more evidence support and all that. Now, with longevity related topics related to the gut health, what excites you the most?
I mean, you look at these super old people, and I've had the pleasure of seeing a lot of them in my clinics and traveling to visit these people. And one of the remarkable things about a lot of these people is they are sheep and goat herders. They eat a lot of fermented sausages. Shockingly, and I get into trouble every time I say this, the vast majority of these super old people are smokers. And nicotine is a really impressive longevity drug. Now, its delivery device is a problem. And people, when I talk about this, people go, "Oh, Dr. Gundry's promoting smoking." No, I'm not. Never had a cigarette in my life. I had a cigar once. But nicotine is very interesting. So that I'll leave it at that. But
so specific to is that different from the whole NAD craze and NMN, NR, all that stuff?
I'm glad you asked. And I've never actually said this on a podcast, but I don't put anybody on any supplement that I don't try myself first. Can you imagine if every doctor put the patients on a prescription that they actually tried? So I was fascinated when I first got into this years ago that there was talk in longevity that the only drug that we had for cholesterol back in the old days was niacin, nicotinic acid. And we are told over and over again that nicotinic acid has nothing to do with nicotine. And you can look it up and you'll see nothing to do with it. So there were a number of people who were taking pretty good doses of niacin to treat their cholesterol. And when statins came out, niacin kind of fell by the wayside because a lot of people really couldn't tolerate niacin very well. It gave them hot flashes. It blew them bright red. And I had worked myself up to several grams of niacin a day, straight niacin. And I went to have a insurance physical, and they wrote back, said, "We can't assure you you're a smoker." I said, "I'm not a smoker. I'm a heart surgeon." Crying out loud. They said, "Oh, no, you have, nicotine residue in your urine and, byproducts." And I said, "I take niacin, you morons. I tell you what, I'll stop the niacin for 2 weeks. If I'm a smoker, I'm not going to stop smoking for 2 weeks." So I stopped the niacin, it disappeared. And I go, well, that's really interesting. So why am I saying that? Well, these people who were taking niacin for years and years and years and years, there was this lore in longevity that these guys didn't age like we fully expected them to. And that, I think, plays into this NAD, because niacin is actually a really good NAD plus precursor.
Sure.
So do I still take niacin? Yeah. Do I still take NMN, nicotine riboside? Yeah. But I think niacin, so it's getting back to nicotine. These things are really good mitochondrial uncouplers, and I've written books and books about mitochondrial uncoupling. But the more you uncouple your mitochondria to a point, and that basically means making them work less hard and get less oxidative stress, probably the better your long-term health. And nicotine just happened, niacin, right? They're not interchangeable, but there's crossover. That's how it works.
No, I think that's great. I love that.
I mean, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It was great to get to know you and see you around town. This time, next time,
we'll look for each other. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Gundry. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for letting me talk about unicorns.
We love hearing about them. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our Healthy Takeout. Welcome back to Longevity Junkie. Time for our Healthy Takeout. All right, Buck, I am sensing you. And I'm
No. I mean, listen, first and foremost, I mean, he's a smart guy. There's no doubt. I mean, he's his training is all that he's got a lot of gravitas. And so it's important to acknowledge that. And I don't necessarily have a huge amount of disagreements. I think the issues for me are, again, there's a lot of sort of, around the microbiome and leaky gut and lectins and all of this. It all may very well be true, but I don't know that we necessarily have the kind of evidence we typically would like. That doesn't mean that I would discourage anybody from giving these things a try. They're not going to be harmful. And if he is anecdotally, and that's the word again we use in this space to describe things that aren't really necessarily backed by studies, but that you might see some people individually have good responses to, then go for it, right? I mean, I'm sort of interested in potentially trying some of this stuff myself. But medicine is a funny thing. It is still, it straddles science and art of the practice, right? And I don't think you can completely, I don't necessarily like it when physicians are also so focused on only randomized clinical trials that they're not willing to keep an open mind. Really? So I think that's great. The one thing that I do think that it's important to remember is a lot of the things that Dr. Gundry does talk about necessarily are they are controversial in the space, right? This is not mainstream stuff, and again, that's not to any way discredit him. Specifically, on the question of cholesterol, and again, he's a cardiothoracic surgeon, but I've also talked to tons of really cutting edge cardiologists and cardiothoracic surgeons that have a different opinion about the role of cholesterol. And I think traditionally the way we have been taught is this role of cholesterol, to have an impact on coronary artery disease and cardiovascular disease. I think, so I want to make sure that we don't leave the impression that or certainly that I advocate that the idea that cholesterol does not mean that cholesterol does not have an impact on your health. Because personally, I do believe this, and it's backed by the research that we know of. Specifically, we know that populations that genetically have high cholesterol are much more prone to cardiovascular disease and early death from cardiovascular disease. Conversely, we know that populations that have extremely low levels of ApoB, atherogenic particles and lipids, virtually zero cardiovascular disease. So, and then there's this stuff that I talked about with Mendelian randomization studies, and that's a fancy way to say that what we're looking at is genes in people across populations that are not affected by lifestyle and also controlled by inflammation, meaning like they try to take that variable of inflammation out. And cholesterol and ApoB levels do seem to impact the levels of cardiovascular disease that you see in these people. So I just want to give that side of it as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's really important to me I personally believe that that coronary artery disease and cardiovascular disease, it's a combination between lipid elevations and of inflammation. And I do think his emphasis on inflammation is really, really important, because that's something that we've neglected in medicine, and I think has become a really, really clear variable that seems to cause disease across the board. So, I didn't disagree on a lot of things, and I think the things that we disagreed on, I think reasonable people can disagree on.
I think the lifestyle, like when he was saying, people go to Europe and then when they eat, the ice creams and the pizzas and all that stuff there, and then they come and they're like, they don't have a flare up, and then they come here and they eat the same things and they do flare up. Like, it really does matter. There's so many different ingredients, and that's really what we need to.
Well, that's, I think, what you can take away for sure is that the inflammation is a huge, huge problem, and it's under-recognized. I think we are even in traditional. He was mentioning
olive oil, or I don't know if that was on or off, but Brian Johnson, even, he says to, he even sells his olive oil, and he says to take a shot of it basically a day. And that, that definitely helps inflammation. It helps a lot of things because it's such a good fat for our bodies.
I think the kind of inflammation we're generally talking about is stresses from food, stresses from, environment, smoking, high blood pressure, any number of those things can cause it.
By a lot of things.
Yeah. So inflammation, when we talk about inflammation in the blood vessels and stuff, it is a little bit different from thinking about swelling and, you fall down and you hurt yourself and it's swollen. That's inflammation too. But basically talking about things that trigger the immune system. And the more your immune system is triggered, the more it seems like all of these diseases create a problem. I am very intrigued by the idea of the microbiome, but quite honestly, I have not seen, I don't know enough about the stuff. I tried to look as much of this stuff up, and there is a real issue with there not being a lot of, there's not a ton of literature that you can say, that traditional ways we look at medicine and how to treat, that there isn't that much. Again, that's not to say that we shouldn't pay attention to it. It's really hard. It's a really nebulous space, right? Like the biome.
Yeah, there's a lot involved in it too.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that's my take.
Yeah, I did appreciate the fact that it sounds like he's become, now I'm not going to say like spiritual, but at least a little bit more receptive to, Buddhists and things like that. And then also it triggering a conversation I literally had yesterday with my master of Qigong. It's very interesting, and it's all a domino effect. So I, always appreciative. I love that he's written 9 books. There's obviously clearly a lot we could read on Buck.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, interesting stuff. And we'll just wrap it up with that, I guess. Do you want to read us out?
Yeah, of course. Longevity Junky is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD, and Timothy Fonara. It is executive produced by myself, Nikki Lee, Buck Joffrey, and Timothy Fonara. The show is produced by Pretty Fast, and Phil Ferragamo is our producer, and original music by Alloy Tracks. We're distributed by our friends at Acast, and see you next time.